Okay, so this is a really good time for us to introduce the idea of Bruce Tuckman's 5 stages of team development. So initially, Tuckman uh, um, proposed a framework of 4 stages. So um, he undertook this huge review of all the research and literature that had been um, done around the mid 20th century. So we're talking about 1960 when he first put this together. He undertook this huge lit review and review of studies done around teamwork, and he found that as teams went through different stages, the different characteristics started to emerge. And he put it into this framework. And initially, it was the 4 stages: the forming, the storming, the norming, and performing. Then 10 years later, he come back and added adjourning, which is the disbanding. So how it works is like this. Tuckman says, all right, when what the research shows us is that when you get a team, a group of people together, and you form a new team, they're going to show particular characteristics. So, for example, they're going to be uh, pretty reserved. They'll sit back. They'll be trying to get clarity around what we're trying to do. What's the purpose that we're doing? What's my role? What's expected from me here? Who are these people around me? What do they know? You know, what are their level of expertise, and so forth. Once the team goes through that stage of getting sufficient information that they're starting to answer some of those questions, you'll see them start to progress into the storming stage. Now, this is now where they start to try and influence the environment a little bit. So you'll see some of this conflict emerge here, where people start to question what we're doing, question how we're doing it, and question uh, decisions that were made earlier, for example, in the forming stage. And those questions will be targeted, and that challenging will be targeted towards leadership and management, but may also be targeted towards each other. So, as you start to jostle for position in amongst the team and so forth. The norming stage, and if we progress through the storming stage, the norming stage is where we now start to get some routine occurring within the team. So you'll start to see some norms emerge. So patterns of behavior. So people start to form some relationships. Some of those relationships might be closer. You'll start to build some uh, informal networks. You'll start to build some camaraderie in amongst the team. And this is generally where most teams sit within this norming, where they're working together, probably not at their most efficient, but working together pretty well. The stage 4, the performing stage, was what we characterize as a high performance stage. So this is where we talk about effective teams or high performance teams. We're really talking about the performance stage. This is where people now start to build really strong relationships amongst each other. Trust is growing. People take autonomy in their work. They are empowered to make decisions and really understand what they're doing, are committed to what they're doing, understand what everybody else does, committed to what everyone else is doing, and has a degree of confidence that I've been talking about. And so this is the performing stage. And then the adjourning stage, which he introduced later, was looking at characteristics of what happens when teams break up. This idea to have closure, to be able to tell stories about their experience and so forth. I mean, we don't necessarily need to spend too much time on the adjourning. That's more, I suppose, in project management context, where you may be managing project teams, and at the end of the project, you got to break them up. There's certain things that you need to do in terms of making sure that you handle that well around things like doing debriefs and having celebrations of success and so forth. And I've talked through a lot of these points, but just a couple of points I want to make here. It's not necessarily linear. So the stages don't go one. Tuckman said the stages don't necessarily go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then up to 5. So just because you're on 3 doesn't mean you're going to go up to 4 next. It can jump around all over the place. So you might go 1 to 2, up to norming. You might have some change of personnel and you go back to forming, or you may have one personnel change and you're back to storming, or we might be up in a high performing phase, and then legislation changes. So what we were comfortable with and knew was the norm in terms of operating procedures. We're now going back to the drawing board. So this might create a bit of storming or back to norming as we're trying to work our way through it. So it's not necessarily 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It can jump around depending on some of those causal factors that I mentioned as examples. Uh, and and our role as the leader and manager is to make sure that we're doing whatever we can to help the team to to progress through these stages to get to the high performance one. That's really where we want to go. So um, just the point I want to make about the foundations of Tuckman's theory. The foundations of Tuckman's theory is that it focuses on two key dimensions, and that is the dimension of focus on task and focus on relationships. So, as effective leaders and managers, you don't need to necessarily understand Tuckman um, to the nth degree to be able to give a presentation such as this on Tuckman. What what you do need to understand are the defining characteristics that Tuckman's talking about, and the defining characteristics are the team's focus on what they're doing and the team's focus on each other. So if you look at just this graph here, which illustrates it really well, when the team is in the forming stage, they're they're kind of mid-focused on the task. What are we doing here? I'm not really sure what the team's doing. I'm not really sure what I am doing. I'm not really sure if I can do it. So you've got that, and I think it's conservative to say mid. I would guess that if we were to do this review again, we'll probably find it's a little bit higher. Um, but we've got this focus on the task, and because we're task focused, we're not really all that focused on building those relationships. When when we're in the storming stage, when we start to question what we're doing and what decisions that have been made previously, and we're starting to question each other's role within the team and whether such and such can do it, or whether they have the skill, or whether they're a good balance for this team and so forth. We're not really focused on task, and we're not really focused on building relationships. And this is where productivity drops down. When teams are in the storming stage, that's when things don't get done. So as a leader and a manager, when often when productivity is down, you start to um, put a microscope to what's going on. You start to see that some of these characteristics of storming are emerging. So people are questioning the value, or whether it's the right way to do their task, and they're questioning each other. So you're not really performing really well in either the task focus or the relationship focus. As we start to come out of that storming um, trough, and we're starting to move back up the norming stage, we're starting to see people focus back on the task and back on relationships. So we're now starting to get that commitment back to what we're doing here and why we're doing it and how it's important. But we're also now starting to understand the importance of building relationships. So, that's where we start to build camaraderie, and we start to build some of those close relationships that I briefly mentioned at the previous slide. When we're in high performance teams are highly task focused and are highly relationship focused. And that goes back to that description I was talking earlier about a high performance team. Not only are we committed and totally focused on what we're doing, but we're also committed and totally focused on each other. So as a leader and a manager, we don't necessarily need to understand or be able to recite Tuckman's verbatim, but we do need to understand these characteristics so that when you're looking at your team, you're asking yourself, in terms of team effectiveness, how focused are they on what we're doing, and how well does that align, and how focused are they on each other's role and the importance of each other's role, and how committed are they to each other. They're really the two things that you want to do. So we're trying to build teamwork. Teamwork is about um, coordinating each other's activities, but we're also making sure that coordinating that activity in line with the direction, the objective, and the task that we're trying to achieve as a team. So those two things are really important. So now I just want to go back and unpack each of these stages a little bit. So in the forming stage, so we get a group of people together. In the forming stage, this is the type of things that you'll see. You'll see caution, you'll see uncertainty, you'll see people will avoid conflict because they're not really sure about who all these others are and what their role are or what their level of expertise are. And there's a lot of ignorance in the group in the sense that we don't know these things. So people tend to be a lot more cautious. So we don't necessarily see any conflict, and people are really looking for that direction. So as a leader and a manager, we see these things, and so we're sharing with the team. Okay, this is what we're trying to do. This is the overall goal. This is what every individual's role is within that. But because of the characteristics of the forming stage, we don't get a lot of feedback. So we don't get a lot of questions being asked. We don't get much pushback that we might be used to with a team in a different stage. So we tend to, one of the traps that we can fall in is that we can tend to think that everything's okay. Yep, we've got the message through. Geez, I'm a really good communicator because no one's asked any questions and they've got the message and so forth. Going under the false assumption that that everyone's latched onto everything I've said, and it may not necessarily be the case. So the type of things that we need to do at this stage, we need to adopt a coordinating and directing function. So we need to make sure that people understand what we're doing, that direction, and we need to understand how they rely on each other, that coordination, so that we're getting that teamwork started. We're going to make sure that we clarify the goals, but we really need to involve the team in clarifying the goals. So by involving them, we're really getting that connection. So for example, I might share with you what the goal is, but then ask you to come back to me or share with me how you feel you can do that. How do you feel you'll go about that? And by doing that, I'm making sure I'm able to check in your understanding of it. So if you can't really give me a clear response on how you can contribute to that goal, or your understanding how you can contribute at this stage, then I know that we need to talk more about clarifying those goals and what your role is within that. We need to make sure that we encourage that uncertainty and any concerns. So that doesn't mean just saying, okay, has anyone got any questions? You're going to get silence because it's the forming stage. It might be about doing that, but then making sure that you follow up one-on-one. Okay, just wanted to follow up on that meeting. How did you feel about what we're saying? How do you feel about your role within that? Is there anything there that, do you feel you've got some adequate support? Do you think that you've got the skills? Do you want some training? Would you like to do some coaching? Do some buddying up with someone, so you can just have these follow-up conversations to really give people the opportunity to express any concerns that they have. Anything that we can address now is going to help us build that rapport and trust that will assist us in getting through the storming stage a lot better. So we're actually like trying to build a bit of trying to build a bit of bank that we can rely on a bit in the next stage. It's also a really good time to make sure that we clarify any procedural rules, codes of conduct, codes of behavior, SOPs in terms of standard or safe operating procedures and so forth. And making sure that we, going back to this idea of building trust and creating a safe environment, making sure that we're supportive of all contributions, that we don't ridicule people for making suggestions or raising comments, but we really encourage that and reward that, so that we start to build an environment where people feel confident to express their concerns. Understanding that if someone has a concern and they don't express it, it's going to manifest itself in other ways. So it'll go through like the rumor mill, or it'll go through some type of unsanctioned underground discussion that you then don't have the opportunity to engage with to clarify or correct or anything like that. At least when it's out in the open, as a manager, you have the opportunity to address it, to address any concerns, to correct any misunderstandings and so forth. So we go through the forming stage. Everyone gets clarification about what they're doing. And now as they start to build their understanding, they start to question what we're doing. And some of that might be where you get a little bit of information, but you're still really naive or ignorant to a lot of other information. So some of that, the conflict that emerges as a manager and a leader, you might go, oh, it's probably just because you're not aware of the bigger picture. Some of it is because they do have genuine new ideas and other ways that things can be done that perhaps we haven't considered. Or some of it might just be jostling for status or position within the team, which is quite a natural human characteristic. So the type of things that we'll see in the storming stage, we'll start to see challenges of ideas, conflicts, criticisms of previous decisions, power struggles in terms of seniority or expertise. Um, you'll start to see these, and that will manifest themselves. They can manifest themselves quite explicit and overtly, or they can be quite quite subtle in more subversive ways, passive aggressive behavior, and so forth. So, as a leader, one of the mistakes that often happens here with especially inexperienced managers or managers who aren't so confident in their own ability is that they'll tend to um, shy away from addressing the conflict or the challenges that are going on. So, go in the office, close the door, and say, sort it out for yourself. And of course, that has a risk. And sometimes there is a time and a place for where people have to sort their thing out for themselves. But generally speaking, as a leader, you need to facilitate an environment where people can work through these things. So that is about productivity has gone through the floor. We're in the storming stage. People aren't focused on the task, and people are not trying to help each other out. So productivity stops. So what we need to do is we need to stop what we're doing and start to really create a platform for these uh, concerns and issues that people have to be expressed and for us to work through them so that we can get back onto the job as quick as possible. So that means things like you know, um, uh, meetings, discussions, platforms for people to make suggestions or raise concerns, and for us to have a methodical approach to dealing with these problems, dealing with these concerns. So, researching, I'll talk more about this shortly, but researching the data, understanding what our objective is, brainstorming different solutions, choosing the best solution, getting people to buy in on actions, doing follow ups, and so forth. And this is really the type of things that we should be doing as a leader to help people to emerge through the storming stage. So here is now where we're starting to lean on some of that collateral, some of that trust that we built up in the forming stage. So because we've done the follow up in the forming stage, and we were clarifying with people, and people are starting to understand and get to know us as leaders and know that we've really got their interests in mind, we can start to lean on some of that when we're dealing with some of these challenges. And again, conflict isn't going to be people yelling and screaming at each other, but it is going to be that they're challenging what we're doing, and as a result of that, are not fully committed to what we're doing. So what we want to do is we want to get people to raise those concerns. We want to work through those so that we can, and when I say work through that, get people involved in the solution making, get people involved in those plans of action so that we can get buy-in and commitment. I'll talk more about that when we talk about planning a bit later as well, and I've talked about it in the planning unit. But this idea of if we can involve people in describing the steps and outlining what we're going to do, we're going to get greater buy-in and commitment into it. And looking to synthesize or combine ideas so that we um, get this consensus in the way that we go about doing things. So everybody might not get what they want exactly, but the solution will have part of them in it, so they still identify with that solution. So hopefully we've done that really well. We've gone through. We've facilitated these discussions. We've done collaborative work around problem solving. We've had buy-in and commitment around the solutions, and now we're starting to build this norming stage. We're transitioning to where we're starting to get in the groove a little bit, where we've got agreement on how we should be doing things, and we're starting to get into that. We're starting to build strong relationships, or we're starting to build relationships amongst the team, and some of those will be pockets of strong relationships, and some of those will be pockets of weak relationships. So you'll start to see things like the morale will start to increase. Some joking and some lightheartedness will occur. You'll see sharing of information. People will be a lot more open to sharing information, whereas in the storming stage, because it's a conflict stage, people tend to hold on to information. But now in the storming stage, you'll start to see information getting passed on more regularly and more appropriately, and you'll start to see people support each other, and a bit more open-mindedness in the team in terms of suggestions and solutions and so forth. So here we want to just create an environment where we can um, really nurture those behaviors and allow them to flourish, because that's what we want to get to the performing stage. So here we're going to encourage people to take more responsibility in what they're doing. So we're going to allow people to take on tasks and responsibility of tasks, and be more self-managed, more autonomous in the way they do things. We still want to keep a fairly close eye on it in terms of making sure that they're developing the skills and competencies, and they understand the scope of their responsibilities and so forth. But we're now starting to encourage people to to do a lot more of that decision making. We're going to start to delegate. Delegation's more in terms of the performing stage, but we're starting to delegate some of that responsibility down to team members. So some of that responsibility, as I mentioned, might be decision making, but some of it might be leadership as well amongst the teams. We might give people different roles within the team around leadership. So it might be around leadership in particular tasks. We're going to maintain this high level of communication, so that we're creating an environment where people, a culture where people feel confident to make recommendations. Say, for example, continuous improvement recommendations, and they can air suggestions, and that it will be supported by the team, not only by management but also by the team. And part of that is encouraging systematic planning for what we're trying to do. So again, those type of behaviors that we introduce in the storming stage, where we're getting people to be part of the solution and have that buy-in and so forth. So when we're at this high performance stage, this is where we go back to this team effectiveness that I was describing earlier. Full commitment, full involvement, and full acceptance of others. You'll start to see people go beyond the requirements of the role, so this voluntary effort. You'll start to see warm relationships, and some of those relationships will spill out into this personal space. They don't have to, by the way. You can have a really high performance team, and at the end of the day, people don't want to socialize with each other outside of work. That's not a necessary requirement. But sometimes you do see that. You'll see that some of those really strong relationships that are built in the workplace will then spill out into the private lives. And importantly, something I haven't mentioned so far, but when people have confidence in their own ability and the ability of others, and in you as a leader and a manager, you'll start to see the emergence of more creativity, because creativity it's a risky business. If you're being creative and you're trying something new, there's always a risk of something going wrong. Hopefully, we've got good processes in place in which to manage that risk, and it will depend on your risk appetite and your risk tolerance and so forth. However, a high performance team will be more likely to undertake a good calculated risk, to be able to come up with something new and a new initiative, or a better way of doing something. And we see this in the sporting arena, where high performance teams, sometimes you'll see a player who plays in defense just do this really unusual attacking move that you wouldn't necessarily see from a player in that position. And it's because they have the confidence in themselves, and they have the confidence in their teammates that they're not going to get berated if it goes wrong. So you'll see this in the workplace as well, and again, it has got to tie in with our risk framework. But you'll see that people will start to have greater confidence in being able to take a punt around how we can be more creative or more innovative in the way that we do things. So here, as a leader and a manager, the best thing we can be doing here is continuation of those things that I talked about. The delegation, empowering people, being able to make decisions for themselves and so forth. But the other tool that we have here is that positive feedback and positive reinforcement. And I've got it as a separate topic in this video, but we know the research shows us that when we reward behavior, you'll increase the likelihood of that behavior being replicated. So as we're starting to see these positive behaviors emerge from the team as they going through the norming stage to the performing stage, we should be really providing that positive feedback, that reward to encourage them to keep going. You know, the reinforcement of that behavior to keep replicating that behavior. And this will require us to do things like inclusive communication strategies. You know, making sure that we're open, transparent. We're inviting everybody in, regardless of their communication approaches, regardless of their differences. That everybody gets a fair and equal voice within what we're doing. And then, you know, giving the team, and I mentioned this already, but giving the team the empowerment to be able to work within their scope of responsibility. So when I talk about empowerment, I'm really talking about the power to control your environment. And that's got to be within your scope. So in my role, I have a scope of authority. Your role, you've got a scope of authority. And when you're in a high performance team, you're confident that you can make decisions within that scope, that your manager, that me as your leader or manager I'm not going to be breathing down your neck, trying to micromanage you when you're doing that. So this idea of being able to, you know, set direction and standards, not only in line with the organization, but in line with your scope of responsibility. And as just briefly, with the adjourning stage, you know, the type of signs you'll see with individuals as teams are breaking up is you'll see stress, uncertainty, apprehension. And our responsibility as a behavior, as a leader, is making sure that we encourage that participation and achievement. We encourage, the recognition of that participation and that achievement from the team and individuals. We create opportunity for people to get together, tell their stories, and say their goodbyes. Not goodbyes to each other. Often within an organization, people still see each other, but within a particular objective. So if I talk about project management, where this is really common, you work on a project. It's important that you have closure on that project. You might have like a morning tea or a lunch where might do something like a lessons learned, you know, asking for feedback, but also give an opportunity for people just to talk stories around the project, to talk about the successes and have a laugh about the failures, and then move on to the next task at hand, which might be another project. And sometimes it is about, you know, making sure that we handle the termination and disengagement process properly. You know, making sure that that we do thank people, that we are fair and equitable in the way that we facilitate the end of that tenure. So this table here is just really a summary of everything that I've gone through in terms of different stages and what we need to be doing. In the forming stage, we need to be directing the team, establishing clear objectives, both as a team and for individuals. In the storming stage, we need to start building those processes and structures, you know, starting to build those elements of trust between us and the team and between the team members. We need to be resolving conflicts or challenges. We need to be obviously remaining positive and motivating. It's a great idea to actually share with the team the framework, to say, you know, this is quite normal for us. You don't have to go through the whole Tuckman thing, but you say, you know, this is quite normal in team development, that we're trying to sort out what's going on and trying to get clear, and this is really good. So let's share what you're thinking so we can work through that. In the norming stage, we step back, we help team members take responsibility for progress towards their goals. And in the performing stage, this is really where we're, you know, pushing down the responsibility of the individual. We're delegating tasks and projects as far as we can within their scope of delegation, of course. And then in the adjourning, we're taking the time to celebrate the achievement. So that's a really good summary table. And that comes from Mind Tools, which is a terrific resource on many of these things. So what's the key message from Tuckman? Well, this is what I'll leave you with in terms of the takeaways from Tuckman. If we want to have a high performance team, we need to make sure that we set clear team purpose and team objectives. We need to make sure that everybody has clear responsibility and accountabilities, and that there are mechanisms in place so that we can provide support from ourselves, but support from each other, understanding that a high performance team has less reliance on us as a leader than a team that's in the forming or storming stage. So we want to be able to set clear responsibilities and accountabilities so people can manage themselves. And we want to have mechanisms in place where they can get support not only from us if they need it, but they can get support from each other. So that means things like ongoing feedback and consultation, the idea of not micromanaging, but allowing people to work within their scope. So sharing that decision making and that control, really fostering a culture that is an environment where it's normal in terms of behaviors of trust, of honesty, of integrity, of transparency, when we talk about openness and so forth, usually aligned with your values, code of conduct. And we can encourage cooperation, collaboration, participation. So our role as a leader is to make sure that we do what we can to ensure that people are working collaboratively, that is, working together to get solutions for each other, are cooperating, that is coordinating what they're doing, their information, the timing of their activities and so forth, and participation, that everybody is involved, that we don't have coteries within our group of um, cliques or little groups, and then and that means that other people are left out. We need to make sure that everybody's involved, because going back to that that phrase that I used earlier, we're only as strong as our weakest link. So making sure that every link is strong and every link is involved.